So good afternoon and a big warm welcome to the 16th episode and Automotive EV Week special of the EV Café. Today's agenda is an important one. As we know, once you try an electric car, you can't help but love them. And they make ICE vehicles feel like a bit of an antique. They're high-tech, no tailpipe emissions, linear performance, blah, 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 but just downright cool. But what's holding some people back? Well, most of that's down to drivers not getting enough information around range capability and refueling these vehicles, and not of the wet kind, but with those lovely and hopefully green electrons. How much will I pay and how do I use it? I don't want to download another app. I prefer refueling my ICE vehicle. There's not enough public charging available. I don't have off-street parking, but I don't have enough power on site, etc., etc. If any of that sounds like you, then you're in the right place. And if it doesn't sound like you, then you're also in the right place, as you can help us, the EV Café team today, address all those myths and challenges to ultimately help educate charging electric vehicles for today and tomorrow. We have lined up some pretty awesome people that are industry leaders to help us do this. And so who are they? To kickstart the discussion, we will hear from Sukky from the SMMT head office, who will go through their analysis and explain the figures and what they think the required infrastructure looks like. Then after, we will hear from the main man himself from Hyperion Executive Search, David Hunt, and his very broad perspective and experience from dealing with lots of EVSE providers and operators. Chris from Connected Curb will then tell us what they are doing to help those that don't have off-street parking. Then James from Engenie, who is going to tell us what he thinks the public network is like from a new customer's point of view. Last but by no means least, who hasn't arrived yet, is Edward from Pivot Power. He's going to talk to us about the battery charging and electric vehicle charging network of Pivot Powers. So quickly about the EV Café, especially for those of you that have never tuned in before, and if this is your first time. And just to reiterate this to the loyal members, it is very much about you lot as the participants than it is about us as the panelists and special guests. So we would love to hear from you. So if you could share who you are and where you're from using the chat box, then we would really appreciate that. And please do feel free to chat amongst yourselves or to the panel using this. If you, however, find it distracting, especially during some of the talks and presentations, then feel free to close or just simply ignore it. Be nice, be kind, no silly comments, otherwise you'll be kicked out by security, aka John Curtis. If you have a question for us, then please click the Q&A tab and we'll endeavour to answer your question as soon as we can, either in the chat box live or in what we call the mailroom section, which will be hosted by the lovely John Curtis this week. I reckon he'll make a great mailboy. If you want to talk to us, and come off mute, then please raise your virtual hand. You should see the icon on the screen. And do this during the Q&A section, and that way you can cover something we might have missed, challenge us, or simply just to say hello to the panel. Heckling is always allowed. As for the panel and the special guest joining us today, I don't know where Graeme's gone. He's supposed to be joining as a special guest throughout, but he's disappeared. I think he's shy, isn't he, Graeme? Hi, Graeme.
Very shy, very shy. Shy and retiring.
When are you retiring?
So
You
for
can't
all
retire,
of
I
you,
need you.
So for all of you, just a gentle reminder to please raise your hand on camera if you want to talk. This is simply just to avoid crossing over each other, as we do have quite a busy panel at some times throughout the session. It's worth noting that John Curtis has retired from his clock keeping, and Sam Clarke is now taking on that role.
Boom.
So John's been demoted to the mailroom, and Sam's been promoted to the clock timekeeping.
You said it was promoted earlier. He was all excited.
Yeah.
Now I've changed my mind, Paul.
Well, I've done bad things.
So who are the Café crew? Hopefully you know who I am by now, but just for those that don't, I am the head barista for today, and my name is Jonny Berry. I've always known as Volty McVoltface. Again, a big thanks to James from Zoom EV for that. And quickly, I just work in the fleet sales department for Wehner UK, and I'm always eager to engage with you, whether you're a fleet operator, leasing company, dealer, public sector, you name it. And we love bringing everyone together every now and then for these lovely EV Café sessions to help to the road to decarbonisation in a light-hearted, educational way. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am joined by, so that's enough from me. I'm joined by an awesome bunch who make this happen, otherwise known as the Avengers. And we have a special guest Avenger joining us today on the panel to help us fight crime against carbon emitting transport. And that is Graeme Cooper from the National Grid. Would you like to start?
Afternoon.
Would you like to start the introductions? But before you do, and in the meantime, can I ask that the audience please come up with his Avenger name? Over to you, Graeme.
Well, I'm a bit worried that if I'm supposed to be an Avenger, am I supposed to wear my pants outside of my trousers now? You know, or have a cape, maybe? I don't know. Anyway, no, Graeme Cooper, Project Director, Transport Decarbonisation at National Grid. Pipes and wires bit of National Grid rather than the ESO bit of National Grid. I do this stuff from the top down, so big policy stuff, trying to help government, trying to make sure that this all works. But more importantly, I do this at home as well. So 2 EVs, plug-in hybrid, battery electric vehicle, carbon neutral home, ground source heat pumps, all of that sort of stuff as well. So I do it from a engaged consumer looking up and from big industry looking down. So hopefully join the dots in the middle. So that's me.
Let me just say
Excellent.
Cooperman.
Thank you.
It's been suggested Cooperman is the winner.
Need a big C here,
Cooper
maybe.
Man. So first on my screen, I'm going to go with Sam. Would you like to say hello?
Oh, could I go first?
Upstart.
You tried to cut me off last time, so at least I get some. Yeah. Hello, I am Sam Clarke. I'm the newest member, I suppose, to the EV group, and very delighted to be here. I'm the Chief Vehicle Officer for GridServe, so my day job is to get everybody in EVs as quickly as possible and then charge at our locations as quickly and as efficiently as possible. But today I'm just here to enjoy the chat as always, and it's nice to see some more familiar faces, and looking forward to the next wee while and talking all about EV and infrastructure.
Oh, you're next on my screen this time.
Oh, wow. Gosh. So I don't get to look like the glass clown, which is... So I'm Paul Kirby. I work for Vanarama, and my sole aim is to get more and more people into electric vehicles, particularly the electric vans. I try and champion the voice of the people, the individuals, underneath the big companies that are soaking up all the EVs at the moment, but I'm really keen to get as wide a wider group of people to try EVs as possible. And the infrastructure question is a really big one for many people. And I want to give a quick shout out to LeasePlan's Drive the Charge. Anyway, Drive the Charge
Where you want it to
petition. I'm going to put a link in the box later. So I've got the link. I'll pop it in the box later. Do sign the petition to get more charging points on streets and roadsides. And we're going to hear about that today. So that's a perfectly timed plug and shout out.
John, you're next.
Hello, darlings. I'm John Curtis. I am a bit of old furniture, really, I guess. I'm kind of the granddad of the group, and I look after EVs, charging, renewable energy, and I've just recently got into road safety, which is really cool. So lives saved by not killing people, not injuring people with vehicles, and also emissions. So happy days. And we all need to work together to make our roads a much better and safer place to be. Whether you're a walker, a cyclist, somebody who drives a car, doesn't matter. All lives matter. Come on, EVs.
And last but by no means least,
Squeaky.
Squeaky but sweet face.
Or croaking.
Sara Sloman. Road safety, John. That's awesome news. That's really cool. Well, autumn has begun. The rain is back. The kids are back to school, and so that means that I've got a rotten old cold, and I'm losing my voice rapidly. And I realise that will please some of you. But what a lineup we've got for you today. For those who don't know me, I'm Sara Sloman. I work in energy and infrastructure. I'm here to fly the flag for all things zero emission, galvanise as much collaboration and action as possible. And what I mean by that is working with developers, local authorities, electric vehicle supply equipment manufacturers and operators to navigate through an otherwise potentially tricky landscape. And I love this cafe and I love you all, and it's great to be here. Remember, wash those hands.
Graeme, I don't think that's the same background as the rest of us.
What are you doing?
I can't make that work. I may be doing the tech stuff, but I'm a tech Luddite. If I can do switch it off and switch it on again, I keep hammering away at this thing and it's not working. So
You look like a borrower
knows?
hiding in the grass.
Sam, if you don't mind sending Graeme the image, and then he can add an image to his virtual background. But so without further ado, we're on time. Let's kick things off. So can we hear from our first speaker today? Sukky, are you there? Welcome to the EV Cafe.
Thank you. Hi. Okay, so those of you playing conference call bingo, look at your cards. Can you hear me? Can you see my screen? And I'm going to go ahead and share and get on with it. So I'm a bit nervous about time actually, because John always lets me get away with it. I'm not sure Sam will. So I will do my best to stay to 5 minutes.
What are we doing, Johnny? 5 minutes?
Go for it, mate. Go for it.
Be nice, Sam. We go way back.
Yeah, can I just say, I've got an alarm noise. You ready? How's that?
Yeah, I'm sure I can't hear that. Anyway, so thank you for inviting me. I'm Sukky Choongh from the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. I'm gonna just go straight ahead and start talking about the issue that we have here, and that's infrastructure. For all of the things that Jonny has already explained, people are still reluctant to purchase a plug-in vehicle because they're saying there's not enough infrastructure. Now, we had an event a couple of weeks ago, Drive Zero, where we invited media and consumers. We had 60 of the 83 plug-in vehicles that are available on the market on display. Consumers loved them. The technology in the vehicles is absolutely not the issue. Overwhelmingly, the message is if there was more infrastructure, more people would purchase an electric vehicle. So thinking about how much we have at the moment, ZapMap is absolutely the most comprehensive database that we have in the UK. It shows us how much we've got. So 34,000 connectors, of which 8,459 are rapid. And then the remainder being, slower on-street residential charging and public charge points. The Committee on Climate Change in their report back in 2018 said that we need 29,000 charging points. And I believe they mean devices rather than connectors themselves. So according to their stats, yep.
Sorry, just one thing, sorry to interrupt. I just realised you're actually in presenter view. I don't know if you can just play around with it so we can have the whole screen.
Otherwise it spoils the surprise. We see what's
Oh, I'm sorry.
You want to see the next slide, don't you, Sarah?
Oh, I'm so nosy. That would be good. Yeah.
Don't count this onto Sukky's time though, Sam.
Yeah, I'm struggling. It's only got me hide presenter view. Yeah, I'm not.
You make it into presenter view again, see if that makes any difference. Fit to window.
Any better? No.
If you go to the bottom right and go into presenter view, present it, try that.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start again. The issue is probably that I have 2 screens on the go.
Ooh.
Greedy.
Is Melanie watching from ZapMap?
Maybe she knows the figures.
We'll just give that a couple of seconds, shall we?
Here we go.
Better?
We can just see it as the PowerPoint, not as full screen. But we can work with this. It's not an issue.
Dave Bushnell suggests display settings, switch to main. I don't know where that is.
That's down the bottom.
All right, hold on.
What a lovely community we have, all trying to help though. Thank you, Dave. Thank you.
You need to start your presentation before you screen share, then it'll work, apparently.
Do we want to do our facts whilst you sort that out?
Yeah, so, let's Phil. Come on.
I don't know which, is this the poll? Because you love a poll, don't you, Johnny?
My glasses, I could have done the news round.
Oh, boo, Sam.
Oh, no.
Sam, you got to be nice, mate.
So you just go ahead and present how you was. It's fine. We can still see the information on the screen. It's not an issue.
Breaking news.
We did it.
Yeah, just go.
So well.
Just go ahead and just do it. Sorry, just go ahead and carry on. It's fine.
Sorry. Okay.
We can still see the information.
This is what we should have practiced earlier, rather than just chit chatting. But anyway, okay.
You're back on 3.5 minutes.
Thank you. Okay, so 29,000 charge points is what the Committee on Climate Change say we need. I think the question really for us to ask is, do we have enough charge points today for about 300,000 vehicles that we've got on the road? Probably. If we fast forward and try to meet government ambition, like Road to Zero says that we should have 50 to 70% of new car registrations to be plug-in by 2030 and 40% of vans. So if we assume that by 2030 we have a 24% plug-in park, that's 8.4 million vehicles. We are going to need considerably more charge points than we have now. Our estimates show that we think that 86% of people will still charge at home. Those that can charge in their homes will do. So by 2030, about 5 million home charge points and 1.6 million on-street residential charge points, and absolutely essential to tackle the issues with all of those people that don't have off-street parking. We will still need a mix of other charging solutions, you know, whether it's destination, highway, workplace, depot charging, these all present challenges. So our entire figure of 7 million includes everything. And the public charge point accounts for residential on street and the mix of highway charging. The way highway charging is delivered can vary. We've got Project Rapid, which is going to be motorway service stations and some strategic road network, but also the fantastic carbon hubs, the low carbon hubs that are coming up, you know, things like GridServe, etc., and some of the stations that are going up around London. So yeah, this is where our figures came from. I thought, let's just present and discuss, but we believe this is necessary, not just in announcements, but they need to be rolled out with infrastructure in the ground as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sukky.
Well done.
So over to the panel for any initial questions. I can see there's a couple of questions in the chat box.
I believe you finished in time. That's so disappointing.
Sounds nice.
I'm on my best behaviour.
So Sarah, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I always have these thoughts around, you know, the electric forecourts like GridServe and Sam are building. It's so critical to that number, and I think the more that pop up of those, the lower that individual charge point number may end up being, so the turnover will be higher. But I'm wondering about fleet and how fleet are going to cope with this unless they all cooperate and have some kind of back to base at each other's bases. But how can we see the telematics side of things, the data improvements? Means that map is brilliant. We know we have all these apps, and actually the chat was going off just now about people having too many apps. So how, in your opinion, do you think the motor manufacturers themselves, the OEMs, how can they assist us in finding the much needed charge?
The telematics situation is definitely an essential so that drivers know. But there's also the confidence that drivers have once you've started driving an EV. I mean, you're all EV drivers, so you will know firsthand how that works, in that you start off with a bit of range anxiety, but then after you've been driving it for a while, you know how long you can go. So incorporating into telematics where the next charge point is, whether it's available or not, you know, linking that with the open source database that we're pleading for the government to have. I think once we have solutions like that, so it's as easy as, you know, putting in your current sat nav and knowing where the next petrol station is going to be, we do need to have that normalizing of a situation with EV charging as well.
I agree. How long do you think it will be until that linking with the open source database can happen?
Oh,
Well, how long
is it going to be until we get charge points in the ground? I mean, apparently it takes 1 to 4 years to get an electricity connection confirmed. So, you know, it's very, very difficult at the moment to put a time on things. We do have to recognise the current situation we're in, but actually if everybody's at home, that should be an advantage to getting infrastructure works up and running quickly. But in terms of how long the database is going to take, I mean, I defer to OLEV for that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and keep, honestly, from me, thank you so much, and keep doing what you're doing because you're making huge progress. So thank you, Sukky.
Thank you.
Graeme looks very excitable. He's got a question, I think, for you, Sukky.
Well, no, it's just an observation. I sit on the government's EV Energy Task Force. So one of the 21 recommendations was open source data, the ability to have roaming, all of those bits and pieces. So all of those 21 recommendations are currently being considered by OLEV. We know they're thinking about this sort of stuff because they're thinking about things like Project Rapid. So I think there are folks here who are not necessarily seeing action on the ground, but I think the big policy stuff is all going through those wheels now. So there is actually, under the Autonomous and EV Act, the primary legislation is there to actually start to do some of this stuff. The other thing that I've noticed the other day is my mapping system in my car uses Google as its sort of base mapping. Google has now started to map the charge points into Google. So I'm seeing the ones that my car is associated with. It's now started to pick up non-brand specific charges. So this is iterative. It's learning by doing. But actually, I think there's a lot of innovation happening in this space.
I agree. I would definitely focus on the time though as well. You know, Project Rapid has been announced, the charging infrastructure investment got announced 3 years ago, but there's still a process to go through. So, you know, we think before we see anything from Project Rapid physically in terms of infrastructure, it's going to be what, 2025, 2026? And if this is a climate emergency, it needs to happen sooner.
So two things on that. They said, so on the on the Project Rapid vision, I think they've stated 6 ultra rapid chargers at every MSA by 2023 and 6,000 by 2035.
So
That's
sorry,
not a
what's an
linear
NSA?
motorway service area. Good call.
Right,
yeah, sorry, we dropped it. MSA,
No
motorway
acronyms.
service area.
No
Sorry.
acronym bingo
No
today.
acronyms.
Yeah, okay, I failed. But
Yeah,
it's not linear though, isn't it? Is it, as you appreciate? It's not a straight line between 6 and 6,000. So that is an iterative process.
And just to clarify on Project Rapid, the funding that OLEV are providing is not for the charge points themselves, it's for the electricity connection. So the private sector is still expected to jump in and put in the actual charge points. So their targets are to allow provision of 4. And that, I think, is an important message so that it doesn't become misleading for the public. We wouldn't want the public to think, oh, come 2023, I can get a charge point everywhere at the motor service station, because that might not happen.
Okay, thank you very much. Sam, you had your hand up first, and then after that, Paul, and then we go to the mail room.
Yeah, what was I going to say? I think one of Sarah's comments about the irritation of multiple apps. I mean, contactless will be a solution for certainly at GridServe and will be elsewhere as well. So, you know, there is a degree of just being able to turn up and charge by virtue of a contactless payment, which should help simplify. In terms of simplification as well, just one other point on something you mentioned, Sukky, with ZapMap's information is you referenced devices, whereas I think actually locations and connectors are more important, because many of those devices, if you're using, or my point is that there's 2,000 rapid chargers only in terms of the number on the road today. And that's one of the things we've got to focus on, is how many of those charge points are per location, because I think that's going to be really important with mass uptake in terms of how frequently you're able to charge, or how easy you can charge at location, have multiple connectors, multiple devices on one location.
Yeah, I agree. And our assumptions are that, well, we're talking connectors rather than devices. And our assumptions are that every plug-in vehicle can use every connector, whereas we know that in reality, that isn't the situation. The charge points that we have on the road are they can't connect to every single plug-in vehicle. So, you know, some disparity on that.
Paul.
So interesting, Sukky, that you mentioned about the data from the manufacturers, because I think, you know, as Sam will know, you can't really make a business model out of just selling electricity at these charge points. It's going to be a real challenge. So, you know, a kind of real heat mapping of using the data. And I wondered, I mean, it's been an age-old discussion for a long time between leasecos, companies in general, and the manufacturers, who owns the data. And I know that there's been some representation from the SMMT and from other people to the OEMs about this data. How is that progressing, and how can we sort of engage with those guys to come up with heat maps as to where vehicles are going, and in particular where they're stopping, so that we can deploy intelligent charging infrastructure?
It's a difficult situation, mainly for GDPR reasons, and of course data is a commodity as well, so we need to be clear about what data we're sharing. Is it personal? And a lot of it is. If you're tracking where somebody has travelled and where they're stopping, you know, that is construed as personal data. So in terms of where it's going, it's ongoing, and how it's going, it's one of the issues again in the electric vehicle energy task force that's being discussed, but I'm afraid I can't give you any hard and fast answer on that at the moment. It's an ongoing conversation, and it's not just about vehicles and how we're tracking where the car is going, but how many people stop at a charge point, where do they dwell, what about the wider highways information about traffic flows, etc., and natural stops. So that does need to be collaborated and we take a more holistic approach to data.
Thank you ever so much. I think it's actually time for our next guest speaker. So what I'll do is we'll introduce David Hunt to give us a presentation for 5 minutes. But after he's finished, if you can come back on, Sukky, and then we can do the mailroom with John straight away. Okay.
I'm happy.
John Curtis is an attack.
He does not look happy.
The merciless.
But we do have a tight time schedule, and we are on to date. We're eating David's precious time. So, but we will ask her to come back on, and then you can do the Q&A straight after John. I promise. Okay.
Good.
David, are you there? Welcome to the EV Cafe, David.
How are we all doing?
Very well, thank you. Go ahead and share
David.
the screen. Hopefully you can get it to work straight away. That was some technical difficulties this afternoon.
There we go.
There we go.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so just a little bit for context. I'm CEO and founder of Hyperion Executive Search, which is a search firm that works exclusively within clean tech and specifically e-mobility. I also host the Leaders in Clean Tech podcast, where we have about 60 plus episodes now of me talking to thought leaders and CEOs within e-mobility and the clean tech sector. It'd be great to, if you want to jump on there and have a listen in. I'm a mentor to a number of accelerators, a LinkedIn top voice for e-mobility and clean tech, and a speaker at member events and all that kind of stuff, which is all good. So I can move on. Now we've got the technical picture, can't move on. Oh, here we go. So for my day job, I work with and speak to both the VCs that fund a lot of this rollout of infrastructure and the companies themselves who are enabling the e-mobility revolution, charge point operators, CPOs, equipment manufacturers, many of which you wouldn't see there, and also those managing the platforms behind, whether that's from big utilities like Engenie through to really innovative startups like ChargeTrip and Drives and others. So my day, fortunately, is largely speaking to companies who are doing some really cool and exciting things in this space. Myths, I know we're just talking primarily about EVSE today, but much like all of you, I get badgered constantly on LinkedIn and Facebook and God knows where else with people waffling on about various myths. And it's great that this platform enables us to address that for both, hopefully those that are within the bubble, but also those who genuinely are just trying to find stuff out. And that's really the great thing about the platform here. In terms of the things I get asked most often, primarily it's how do I get a job in e-mobility, given the nature of what I do. But also interestingly, going back to the comments from SMMT, I think absolutely there are issues around charge points, which we're talking about today, but it's clear that demand is already outstripping the supply of vehicles, and I don't think it's EV charging infrastructure that's, in my experience, that's holding back people from buying the vehicles. It's the fact you can't actually get any, which is perhaps another issue. Some of the big things I think are coming down the line we've touched on already. Certainly, I think we talked about sort of our entity and the Tesla sort of infrastructure. I think the auto OEMs are certainly getting starting to get serious about building a network like those of Tesla, our entity in particular. When it's not without its troubles trying to get the OEMs to collaborate anyway, but I think there is a focus that they need to do something. And you'll certainly see more of that coming down the line. Obviously, I'll leave Pivot Power to talk about, and obviously Sam from GridServe to talk about the exciting things that those guys are doing in terms of creating hubs. But there are others, and I think there will be, beyond Basel, and there'll be a lot more of those coming down the line. Certainly, payment options are a big thing, and most of the EVSE manufacturers that I work with and speak to are clearly working on interoperability, as many of them do anyway throughout Europe, but not just in terms of seamless and contactless, but also in terms of having no card requirement at all and a billing system that's integrated into the data of the vehicle. I know Mercedes have done something with the ECQ, I think, along those lines, and certainly I think there'll be a big push towards doing more and more of that. Wireless hasn't been touched on so far, and I think in the next 2 to 3 years, you'll actually start to see quite a lot more, particularly for trucks and for sort of public transport, large vehicles. The likes of ABB are sort of bringing to market a lot of wireless and induction charging. And I have on my podcast shortly Andy Dager, who's the CEO of Momentum Dynamics. They've had some great funding, and you'll start to see those, amongst others, bringing wireless and induction charging to the market pretty soon, particularly for, as I say, for transport and for car parks. it won't still connected curbs energy, but what we're certainly seeing, and we've worked with Ubitricity in particular right the way across Europe, scaling very, very rapidly. So off-street parking is clearly an issue, but it is one that is being addressed. And as Graeme alluded to, there's policy instruments being brought to bear to enable that to happen. It's not without its challenges, and you've got companies like Ubitricity and Connected Curb and others who are developing the product solutions that can be rolled out, hopefully, fairly rapidly.
1 minute left, David.
But okay, so quickly, obviously there's going to be a decrease in investment in workplace charging infrastructure. It used to be that I charged more often than not at work, but clearly I haven't actually been to work for 6-9 months. So mostly charging at home these days, but that will certainly have an impact, I think, a little bit. Graeme touched on something. I think the business cases for vehicle to grid, flexibility, energy storage evolving for fleet owners and users will evolve. We've seen that in energy storage broadly, that it takes a while to get the revenue stacks to make commercial sense, and I think we'll start to see in the next 3, 4, 5 years business case, maybe even less actually, business cases for those services, which will encourage further fleet owners and users. That pretty much was just an overview of some thoughts. You can catch me at hyperionexecutive.com, my own website, davidholden.co, and in particular the podcast leaders in cleantech.com. Thank you very much.
Oh, bang on time.
Oh, look at that.
This makes perfect, Dave. That's excellent. Thanks, David. So yeah, Sukky, if you can come back on, and then we'll go live to the mailroom with John Curtis. Get to work, Melbourne.
All right, me duck. How's it going? Right then, let's have a look at questions then.
Is it worst accent day?
Still awful.
Right, okay, so question for Sukky. Now, I must say, before we get fired into the question, that there's a brilliant report from Field Dynamics, which we featured a couple of weeks ago, about the number of people who don't have access to off-street parking. And it's humongous. But anyway, well worth a read.
Thanks.
It's in the chat box. It's all in there. But anyway, I'll fire that over to you again. Questions. So, question from Paul Barnfather, an old friend of the show, who says, what's your view on the split between rapid charge points and slow destination chargers? And what's the split between private, i.e. home and workplace, and public? Got any thoughts at the SMMT on that?
Again, I think that the table showed we still need a mix. So, yeah, I haven't got percentages per se, but I think I showed absolute figures on the table that we shared. We still think, most people are going to charge at home. The public charge points that are on-street residential or at destination, etc., there's always going to be less than your destination because they're faster. So therefore, you're going to get more people through them. So we don't need so many because it's an infrequent charge. So the priority needs to be at home, slower, kind of more 7 kilowatts than 22 kilowatts, simply because it's cheaper, it's easier. Homes are not built with an additional energy supply, so we need to be realistic about how the energy can support the charging requirement needed in the vehicle. Ultimately, it's about the right charge point in the right place.
Indeed, that's a simple message. Can't disagree with you at all. We've got Will Smith has been on. Will Smith, I tell you, it's a fact. And he asks about the Charging Infrastructure Investment Fund and what's holding us back in being able to access the funding that's there.
I'm still trying to get those answers for myself as well. So if anyone can tell me. I know that Zook have been appointed as the procurement lead. Again, I go back to, it was 3 years ago that it was announced, and exactly what's happening, I'm in the dark about. So I'm doing my own investigative piece, which I can't say at this time of the day, to find out, no lunch, to find out, kind of where OLEV are with that. So yeah, sorry, it's an OLEV question and I don't know what's happening.
I'm just busy watching Sarah and Sam, and I've got a sneaky suspicion they're messaging each other. But anyway, let's move on. Vans with charging capabilities. These vans where they're just basically mobile batteries with a subscription service, and you get the van to rock up and charge your EV. Do you think that's a way forward?
I think there's a market for it in an emergency situation, etc. Or if you have a breakdown or something goes wrong, then that's something that we do need to consider as well. And the RAC have got some mobile battery capacity, but it's just part of the bigger picture of having electric mobility, that you've got to be able to cover every eventuality, accidents, emergencies, breakdown.
Now, Alberto De Monte, which is probably the best name we've had so far, has said if 70 to 80% of the charging happens at home, what's the business case for such high numbers of public chargers? Fair question.
Because some of those home chargers are public chargers as well. An on-street residential charge point, even though it's used whilst you are at home and sleeping overnight, it is still a public charge point. So the most of the investment required for public charge points is in the energy cost rather than the charge point itself.
So we blame Graeme Cooper then, basically.
We understand Graham's challenge.
And one final question, I think, just to cover this off, and this is open to just about anybody. Are there any thoughts on standardization of chargers across different brands of cars?
Yes, let's have it.
Let's have it now.
Just do it.
So why don't we?
I think we've sort of got that though. We've got that though, haven't we? Isn't the new Nissan people carrier, 4x4, they've ditched CHAdeMO and gone with CCS.
Yes.
So it sort of implies that CCS is kind of it.
It's a new market, it's competitive. So everyone's got their idea and somebody wants to win. And I think we are seeing a winner. So standardization, I'm quite confident will happen. The market is allowing that to happen.
And with that, it's back to the studio.
Thank you.
Taking pools alive.
Seamless.
Now, what I want to do is I want to give the audience a chance to come off mute and ask the panel some questions, or to just tell us what their experience is on this conversation. So we've got two virtual hands up. We've got a chap called Joel Teague and our good friend Julian. So we'll start with Joel. We've only got a minute or so with you, Joel, but I've just unmuted you. Are you there? I've put him on the spot now, haven't I?
You didn't give me much time to prepare.
No, I didn't.
Go on, Joel.
All right. Afternoon, all.
Afternoon, Joel. Welcome to the EV Cafe.
Thank you very much.
Are you enjoying yourself?
Oh, I always love this. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. I'm really impressed with what Sukky's saying. It's great. SMMT are so important to this, and their attitude is brilliant. Yeah, this is going to come across as a bit of a self-plug because it is what I'm working in, but I think all the elements we've been talking about are so important. It's a massive cake we've got to take a bite out of here. And there's one bit missing. We're talking about home charging, we're talking about workplace charging, we're talking about destination charging, community charging. That's what Co-Charge is doing, and yes, I suppose it's a bit of a plug, but it's so important. We've got over 300,000 home chargers out there. And while we need all this new infrastructure, those are there now. So what we're doing, we've set up Co-Charger and we're working with the OEMs, the car companies, we're working with central government, local government. And the idea is that you just allow someone with a charger to enable 2 or 3 of their neighbours to make a jump to an EV by making their charger available to them normally overnight on a regular and reliable basis. So we're aimed firmly at people who haven't got an EV yet, because there's been some great research. I think Connected Curb are on later. They do some amazing work. They're really important in this. And they've done some great research that shows that actually for an awful lot of people who can't charge at home, they're 4 times less likely to have an EV. And more public chargers doesn't get them all, because unless you've got the right sort at the right price in the right place and the right reliability, the right availability, who's going to go and blow 20, 30 grand on a car on the basis they hope they can find one? So what we're trying to do is just plug that gap to say, look, to give that person the confidence to make the leap to electric, because their neighbour will make that charger available to them every Tuesday night, whatever it is. And it's just another thing that we're trying to do to help this gap. And the thing is, it does it now and it's free. So let's crack on with that. And we want to collaborate, we want to talk to SMMT. Definitely love to talk to Sukky about it. Fleet is going to be really big. So I think this is another element. Community charging is going to be a massive part of this, especially in the early years while we're building up the public infrastructure as well. So I just wanted to put that in.
Thanks for sharing, Joel.
So important. Okay.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think we'll have to have a chat afterwards, because a couple of weeks ago I offered my neighbour my charging point, because I only need to plug in every other week at the moment. And I've got plenty of parking on street. That's fine for me. But I did say on the proviso that they buy a Renault Zoe.
Well, I'm on I'm on my third Zoe, so you're preaching to the converted there.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, thank you ever so much for your input there, Joel. Very much appreciated.
I'll
But we've got
stick a
two
link-
other
Can I-
hand
one more thing?
raises. Yeah.
Sorry. Can I stick a link up? We want anybody with a charger, please sign up as a host, help your neighbours.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Disabled talking now, unfortunately. So we've got our good friend Julian. So what we're going to do is we're going to give us about a minute for each one of these, because we've got a couple more that have raised their hands. So and then we must move on. So Julian, welcome back to the EV Cafe.
Hello, can anyone hear me?
Yes,
loud and clear.
Lovely, lovely.
How's
we
Alice?
love Alice.
Who's Alice?
We
I don't know
love
who Alice is.
You know what's funny? All you guys keep asking about my mom, yeah? Yeah, the only one she's actually interested in is Sam, and I find that really weird. The whole experience is just really concerning, but hey, if I can turn that into sales for Voltric, I will not complain.
Does she want his number? I'll pass it on.
No. I didn't like her boyfriend before that. Let's not ruin what Sam and I are trying to do.
Sam,
so
back to topic, please.
Anyway, look, first and foremost, great topic you guys had. Big shout out to, I've done it twice now, but yeah, Jonny for the Renault Zoe that I had last week. As somebody who just drove a Renault Zoe or drove a vehicle or electric vehicle, my experience with the charging infrastructure was very much based on, because I don't have home charging as well. So, I just had to just get in the car and go. We drove something like 70 miles to watch it, which has barely any charges. All I wanted to do as a driver was charge. And within 7 days, I had 4 or 5 different apps that I had to sign to. And the thing that kept on reoccurring for me was the fact that every time I got to a charger, I was learning about the charger. Now, I imagine after that initial experience, you kind of get used to it. But my wife, who is an EV person who couldn't care less about EVs, she just wants to drive a car. She was suddenly put off because every time she was getting to a charger, there was a whole new experience. And I think for me, with regards to what you guys are talking about, and hopefully, I think someone's mentioned a couple of times, is all people want to do is get to a charger and plug in. She didn't mind paying. Goodness me, I whipped out all the credit cards to pay, but I still found myself dabbling with different signups. So I think with the industry, with the setup, as much as possible, what needs to just happen is simplicity. Is get to a charger to sign up. I mean, I've got 4 apps that I'm not using now because Jonny and the people taking the car back. So it's like, I know, right? John, make a point for me. So as much as possible, that infrastructure has to be simple. And I know for Voltric, what we've done is we're already going through the different chargers and creating videos so that people understand how to use a charger before they get there, so that they're not spending 10 minutes of the time that should be charging setting up.
It's all about the education.
Definitely. Anyway, hopefully more than a minute. Thank you very much, guys. Always great to see your lovely faces. Leave my mother alone. Take care.
Bye, Julian.
Julian makes a great point, and I think that's why Tesla have done so well, because they've made charging simple. Because apart from tripping over the big block thing and not being able to reach the first time I got there, after that it is just unbelievably simple and quick, and that's why everybody goes Tesla works.
Look, we have one virtual hand raise. We'll give Neil the chance to say something, ask a question, and then we must move on to the next special guest. Okay.
I just say, Paul, if you parked your Tesla properly, you wouldn't have tripped over the block. Just
no, I know. I did work that out afterwards.
Oh no, Neil's false alarm. He's lowered his hand, so he's probably hit it by accident. Oh no, he's raised it again. He's raised it again. He's raised it again. Hello, Neil.
Hello, Jonny. Thanks for resurrecting my hand for me. Hello, everybody. So you're doing Hitachi ABB. Power grid, John. I didn't mean it quite like that. A question for Paul, or a comment for Paul. After the last session you held, Highways England announced try before you buy for vans to get people out of diesel and into electric vans. So we're 2 weeks on. What's the news? What's happening? Have they been inundated? Have you been inundated?
Interestingly, that scheme has been going for some time, with Leeds in particular. And I think we got a little bit of feedback from Terry, who wasn't like completely familiar with the project. So I don't know any specific feedback from what the take up has been like since they've gone more public, but it's certainly something that we believe as Vanarama. We've just bought 3 vehicles to do a try before you buy for you know, smaller businesses, and that's very much the focus of the Leeds project, is to allow smaller businesses to try with no cost vehicles, and it is absolutely the way to give people the confidence to make that transition by, you know, having it for more than a day or two, because a day or two you can kind of get away without charging, but obviously you need to be thrown into the world of having to charge, you know, thinking about what you're going to do with that vehicle, making all of your, you know, your routines, you know, work and come to life. So it's a great project. Thank you for raising it. It really helps small businesses think about electric vans, because there are some really good ones on the market, and more coming to the market with a good range, good charging speeds, a great capacity in terms of, you know, the weight and the things that they can carry. So it's great to see, and well done Highways England, and well done Leeds.
That I had to ask rather than you have to tell us all. So I want a slot each week on where are we with white van conversion, please.
Okay, we'll do it.
Challenge accepted by Paul by the looks of it.
That's all right. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Neil. We do have some more hand raises, but we must move on time. We're 5 minutes behind time. So thanks to the special guests already. But Chris, can I ask you to, hello Chris, welcome to the EV Cafe.
Nice to speak to you all, and thank you for lining up Joel and David before me to give us a plug before I even started talking. So
happens all the time.
Very much for that. You sort of teed things up quite nicely. Hopefully I'll deliver.
So go ahead and share your screen, Chris, and we'll let you know. We'll give you the thumbs up if we can see it.
Good to see somebody with a proper haircut.
Started your clock, Chris, whenever you're ready.
Very good. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some research that was referenced by Joel earlier on. So I'll only go into the high level details of it. And then if there's time, I'll talk to you a little bit about how we think of the EV and the EV charging experience that you should be having. So what you saw in the background there was one of our charging points, the Gecko on parking posts or parking boards. Essentially, we did this research earlier in the year. So 1,500 people polled, and then surveys with 500 EV drivers. The data gave us some quite interesting stats. So I'd encourage you all to go and download the report. Happy to share it on this forum. The key highlights, I guess, were 84% of all the people we surveyed, actually ranged between 80 and 88%, thought that more charging infrastructure should be deployed on streets. Interestingly, when you then asked people whether they wanted them outside their homes, the number dropped to well below 40%. And depending on age group, went down to about 23% for the older parts of society. The interesting part around that was we think it comes down to education. I think it's been mentioned a few times on the call already. Education is key in getting people to understand what charging infrastructure is likely to be deployed. So the big petrol pump style units are not the sort of units we should be deploying in residential areas. We need to be deploying more visually discrete, longer life bits of kit. The other part that was interesting about it was that 67% of all the existing EV drivers that we looked at or that we spoke to would not have bought an EV if they couldn't charge at home or overnight. So that is either on street if there's a home charging solution there, or on their driveway. That is pretty fundamental, because the first question we were sort of asking is, how do we move from where we are today, which is extreme early adopter, through early adopter and onto mainstream buyers? So that provision of infrastructure, I think the whole purpose of this conversation is that provision of infrastructure is fundamental. And then linked into that, 80% of charging done at home, a statistic that's widely known already. Why does that matter though? So what's the key part in this? Well, 62% of the population simply can't charge at home. So this is a statistic that is normally underquoted. So the statistic is actually 34% don't have a driveway. That's the statistic that's normally talked about. The problem is there's a further 28% of the population, and this is not our data, this is English Housing Survey data, which suggests that people have somewhere dedicated to park their car, but nowhere near a domestic power supply. So they can't put a charging point in at home. So there needs to be better public charging infrastructure. And then to lead on to that, 89% of all the people we spoke to who didn't currently have an EV, again, said they would be encouraged to be buying an EV if they had charging infrastructure where they could park long dwell overnight, or potentially at work. So that's enough of the data. If you want more of it, download the report, or I can send it to you directly. There's some quite interesting stuff in there. What it doesn't tell us is, and what people think we're trying to say, is that there's no place for fast or rapid charging or ultra rapid charging. There is, very clearly. I think it was mentioned earlier on. It's just about deploying the right charging infrastructure in the right place that matches dwell time. It's not either or. This isn't Betamax or VHS. We need it all. It's just in the right places. So when we think about providing that home charging solution for that 62% who can't home charge, we think about these 5 things. Convenience and confidence, so charging infrastructure in the right place, giving people confidence and convenience in the way they want to charge. So having to drive somewhere to wait for a rapid charging point is not convenient for people like me who don't have a driveway. Also, confidence in terms of reliability. I've seen that coming up on the chat windows a lot. Their systems are not reliable enough in terms of the infrastructure, so we need to be deploying better stuff around that. Also, a big opportunity around smart cities. So if we're digging up all the UK's roads, why don't we pair technologies together? So when we deploy fast fiber at the same time, meaning that we're a smart cities vendor, not just an EV charging solution. So we can do 5G, Wi-Fi, sensors, all that sort of stuff as well. The kit needs to be environmentally friendly, both from a visual perspective. You saw the statistics I mentioned earlier on. You can't be deploying massive bits of kit in streets. So it needs to be visually inobtrusive. It needs to be long life. So
1 minute, Chris.
Deployed at the moment is that we would suggest is more product focused rather than infrastructure. We need to be talking about infrastructure solutions. And then the other part is the manufacturing or the materials involved in it. Linked into that, it was touched on earlier on, technology development. We're moving to a wireless or inductive charging model potentially in future. Who knows whether that's coming, but the systems deployed today should be flexible to the future. And then the final point is commercial viability. Some of the concession contracts that are coming out at the moment just do not make commercial sense. So some of the public buyers need to be a little bit more aware of that. I won't talk about this other than that our mission statement is at the top. We're about green mobility for everyone in society, not just because we're holier than thou, but because it makes logical sense. 62% are left behind at the moment, plus disabled drivers where there's very, very little charging infrastructure to support them. And there's 2.75 million disabled drivers in the UK. Just to show you very quickly, so the kit, this is our Gecko, sits on parking posts or bollards. Lamp column solution, but a different power supply is put in along with the fiber connection. Most of these are at the front of the curb rather than the back of the curb. So that's the simple reason we choose these rather than lamp columns. A very good alternative solution, they're lamp columns. Just not our preference. The other one is the Armadillo. So this is made out of recycled vehicle tyres. All the kit's made out of recycled plastics or recycled vehicle tyres. Not designed for busy, cluttered or narrow pavements, designed for big, wide pavements, or ideally to be buried within landscaped areas. So a project at the moment where essentially you hide the charging point. You'd never know it was even there.
You're over time, Chris. You're over time. You've got to wrap it up.
One more. There's the limpet, the wall mounted. And then just the major on this, our awards. I'm saying this not because we're trying to brag, but because I'm amazingly excited about it. Yesterday, we were announced as one of the UN's partners for the UNESCO and the UN's 75th year anniversary. Unbelievably excited about that as a team. The reason for that was the ability to deploy visually inobtrusive advanced technology in streets without affecting the sort of cultural heritage of those sites. So really, really excited about that. But thank you very much for having me. Open to any questions.
Very much, Chris.
I don't know how you do it.
Oh, who had their hand up first?
Me, obviously.
Over to you, Sarah.
100% me. 100%
Really,
me.
Sarah?
Every time. Welcome, Chris. It's so nice to see you. And congratulations on that huge UNESCO announcement yesterday. See your chargers popping up all over heritage sites everywhere, I would think. But I'm thinking about the housing again. So could you explain to us what you feel developers should be considering when planning new housing developments and how the local authorities and developers can work together a bit on this? Because your product is obviously great. There's others out there who'd like to know this as well. So what do you think developers can do to make local authorities warm to their plans?
Well, I think it's a bit of a balance at the moment. So the developers are being told they have to do everything basically, and it's just adding cost for them. And there's a risk that the charging infrastructure is going to sit there not necessarily being used well. I think the project that I give a shout out to our client at Barrett David Wilson Homes and Swindon Council. So we signed a deal down there for 3,000 homes to be deployed over the next 4 or 5 years. That's a really exciting project because it's actually mainly about the enabling infrastructure. In the enabling infrastructure, and then we're also putting in a bit of a blend of some of the active charging points today. So active charging points in shared bays, and then giving residents the opportunity to be able to put stuff in. I think the challenge the developers have is in an awful lot of new developments, you have this exact problem I talked about that 28% that doesn't have a driveway, but is sort of, and so the developers are struggling to sort of tackle that. So this idea of putting the infrastructure even in those shared bays, to reduce the cost for the user to put in. The other point that's really difficult on it, and I think Graeme would probably come in on this, is the developers are now being told in many instances for projects that got approved 5 to 10 years ago, they have to put a lot of charging points in. They are very worried about the impact that has on their power requirements. So the reason why the Witchellstowe project, this one with Barrett David Wilson sort of selected us, was because of the ability to load manage. So I think that's going to be a key piece going forward, is to have sensible conversations with the DNOs and the IDNOs about, actually, you know what, you don't need to assume there's going to be 3,007 kilowatt charging points all pumping out at exactly the same time. You can smart charge more effectively.
Yes, I think there's a lot of work to be done. I feel like there should be some kind of system where it says if you've got this many houses, you should be having a rapid as a community-based hub with a shop next to it and some e-mobility option like scooters or hire cars as well, rather than putting a driveway or 1.2 standard driveway offer. It's got to change. And I think if developers could be ploughing money straight into a solution rather than giving it to the councils and then the council spending it, it's such a convoluted, long process. I can't wait for it to improve.
We would agree completely. I think having something that is specific to the sites makes complete sense. So if it's an urban area development, then if you're not putting micromobility solutions in there, then you're missing an opportunity.
Then you need to take a day off and come back with a better idea.
Agreed. Paul, you had a question.
Yeah, so one serious point, do we need John back as the clock watcher? Because Chris obviously didn't think Sam had any authority at all. I'm just saying. Anyway,
it's going to be more ruthless now.
Sam need to be, I'm afraid. Yeah, definitely.
All right.
But great presentation, Chris, and it was worth waiting to see that last bit in terms of all the awards that you're winning. So for me, a couple of questions. First of all, in terms of about the access for people, you know, how do people access it? Because I'm not sort of seeing an easily identifiable RFID tag, or do people have to sign up? Because what I've seen with Ubitricity is a lot of their spaces are in lampposts and in resident-only bays, so other people can't access them easily. And also the other bit that easily happens is that they're iced because there's no kind of control over those bays. And then second question is around commercial vehicles. A lot of commercial vehicles are parked on street, and will that be something that, I mean, I suppose anybody can plug in, right? But is there any special thought around commercial vehicles?
That's a lot to answer. So in terms of, but all really good questions. In terms of how do you access it, we have the RFID on all of the charging points, so you can tap in. We can do tap and go payments. We don't actually do that on our charging points. And I guess I was going to raise this earlier on. I think when we talk about roaming and the sort of accessing of charging points, I think there does need to be a sensible conversation around what is a habitual residential charging experience versus what is an ad hoc on journey charging experience. So if you're driving to Edinburgh, you don't want to have to download 5 apps on the way there. Equally, if you're returning to the same charging point every single night or every single week, actually having an app system is quite useful, because then you can start to do some clever things around the power management, understanding the customer, being able to work with the DNO to try and forecast. So I think there's an element around that. But in terms of the accessibility, there's a QR code on every single one of the charging points that takes you directly to the app. I think the other point I'd say on the roaming piece is I think the government needs to set some more strict things. And I think Graeme talked about that, and they are sort of doing stuff. I would also suggest actually, though, that the industry seems to be changing. So we're having some really interesting conversations with different parties about having interoperability agreements. I think the conversation has moved on dramatically in the last few months, maybe because we've all had a little bit of time to sit at home and reflect. And then your next question was around the sort of bay blocking and access in terms of the TROs or the traffic regulation orders. I guess our mantra on this would be there's a huge amount of variability in what people talk about around the amount of charging points that are required. We think if you're going to deploy 1 or 2 charging points on a street, you're going to have a problem with accessibility of charging points. We think you need to have ubiquity. We think there needs to be a lot of charging points, which is why we're trying to make it as visually discreet as possible. And another plug I'd say is in 2 months' time, you won't see our geckos. You'll just see a bollard with the charging point integrated into it. And what I should also say is that isn't the charging point. As Sara knows, and I think a few of you know, our charge point actually sits beneath the ground. So all I've just shown you pictures of is the socket. The charge point is beneath the ground, meaning that over time you can upgrade it and it becomes more and more visually discreet. So the idea is deploy lots and lots and lots of these, and then you don't need to have TROs at such huge density, because as you also all know, as soon as you put TROs on people's streets, they get upset because they're losing parking spaces in most instances where there aren't enough parking spaces already. So if you deploy enough charging points, we think you sort of get around that. The key is to deploy it in a way that's as efficient as possible. So pairing it with fast fiber deployments and all those sort of other things to reduce the cost.
And commercial vehicles?
Commercial vehicles, I think that's a massive thing. And I think I was actually on the automotive EV thing earlier on with Shamla and Colin Heron and Peter Wooding, talking about actually, I think there's an opportunity that exists here. It's a challenge, but there's an opportunity for government to be working with the private sector, particularly in some of the areas. So if you pick the sort of Coronation Street sort of style street, real challenge in what infrastructure you deploy because the pavements are so narrow. But in actual fact, in many of those instances, a lot of those people are actually driving somewhere to work during the day. If you can try and pair with effective mapping of where people are moving around and where they should be charging, you don't have to provide a home charging solution if you're able to provide a workplace charging solution. So, but I agree with you, the sort of British gas vehicles, those sort of ones where the driver takes it home, real challenge.
Okay, one last question from Sarah until Sam will need to get his clock out, as it will be time for our next guest speaker. So
don't wave that clock at me. It was just a very quick comment, just to say.
Quick flash.
What I think is very clever about the connected curb offer is that, as you described, that pillar which contains the charge point doesn't have to be a charge point. It can in fact be an air quality monitor or something to connect telemetry. It doesn't have to be a charger. So I think that's what your future streets offers that other on-street chargers actually doesn't. So hats off to you and many, many congratulations for all those awards. Very well deserved.
Thank you very much. Thanks again for having me. Appreciate the opportunity.
So well.
Thanks, Chris. So it's goodbye for now, Chris, but if you can join back on for the last 20 minutes for another Q&A round, that'd be great. So
have we got Ed yet? I know Ed's in the waiting room.
Yeah, he's not due in until later, so I'll admit him when he's due on at around 20 past. But for now, we've got James from Engenie. Hello, James.
Hey, guys.
Nice to
Jonny.
Can you serenade us before you start?
Oh, so Telecaster?
Maybe. It depends if you're best behaviour or not.
Never.
Treat us at the
purely
end,
for
then.
display purposes.
Les Paul.
Lovely.
What else?
Stage is yours, James.
Les Paul and the Telecaster. What else you got, James?
They're all fake.
It's a craft. I've got two Les Pauls, a Crafter acoustic, and a.
It's a virtual background anyway. Over to you, James.
Right then, guys.
Oh, James, I've already told once, my timekeeping isn't good enough. So you've got 5 minutes, and then Johnny's going to cut you off, right?
Sorry, Sam. Sam, you're breaking up. I can't hear a word.
All right. Look at that.
Like that, is it?
Okay. Can you see stuff?
Yes. Yeah.
Timer starts now.
Can you see the right stuff?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, we're good, James.
Oh,
not anymore.
Oops.
I'm going to pause
Press
you.
the wrong button. Right, there we go. That's better.
There we go. You're
Right,
back.
let's try that again. So as it says there, I'm Chief Technology Officer and Chief Product Officer for Engenie, depending on what hour of the day it is. And yeah, I think I'm going to approach this in slightly a different way to the way everybody else has, for no good reason, except for the fact I'm quite new to all this stuff. So really quick, 2 things you need to know about me. 1, I'm a technology and product guy, but I focus on the human first. And then if it allows, I use technology to fix the problem. And sometimes it doesn't, and a sticker's just as good. And the other thing is, you may have used some of the stuff that I've done in the past. If you've shopped online at Next, there's a chance you've used a page or something I built, including a website. If you've been into the new Argos stores and done their store of the future where all the catalogs disappeared, that was me. And if you've ever ordered anything off of those horrible big touchscreen things at McDonald's, I'm sorry, I'm responsible for that as well, and probably your waistline.
That's a very good thing.
So now where am I? So I joined Engenie about 12 months ago, and quick reveal, in a few weeks' time, we're going to be moving to Osprey. So that's the big plug for the announcement in a few weeks' time. The big thing is that I joined this not really knowing much about EVs, not knowing much about charging or anything else. So when I got here, the first thing I did was have a look around. And my first impressions, I've heard a lot of this already in the comments and in the chats. Owning an EV is confusing, really confusing. There's like so many charge point operators. There's so many manufacturers. There's so many charging speeds. And then there's all these ways of starting and paying for a charge, whether you've got an RFID card or an app or another app or yet another app that you have to download and then wait for the RFID card to get posted to your house, even though you're stuck outside a charge point 100 miles away and can't get it. And then there's all the connectors as well. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I was slightly worried about the whole thing. But the good thing is there's lots and lots of stuff and lots of opportunities to address there. So, you know, what can we do about this? What are we doing about this? Two key things. First of all, going back, human first thinking, and that means keeping it simple. So card payments, it's a big thing. We're doing it. A few other competitors are doing it. And it's key. People are used to doing this. People are used to turning up to a shop and using a card in their pocket to pay. So let them do that. We've got a lot of talk at the moment about plug and charge coming. I don't know how that's going to work or how easy that's going to be and who's going to own that customer and anything else. But from a driver perspective, if it's there, I want to be able to use it. And then the next thing is a visibility and reliability. I mean, if I've got a car and I want to charge it, I need to know where those charges are. I need to know whether it's available. And when I get there, I want the thing to work. I don't want to be standing there in the rain, kicking things and being concerned about how am I going to get home? Where's the nearest one? How am I going to get there? Will I have the right app for it? So I think there's a whole bunch of stuff about putting our heads inside the driver and understanding what they need. And then, you know, I'm repeating a lot of stuff that's already been spoken, but interoperability and partnerships are really key. So, I mean, one of the things we've been doing for a while is we partnered with a company called All-Star. They do fuel cards. Real simple model, everybody already knows. You may have seen recently, there's an announcement. So we're a launch partner with ZapPay. This, I think, is one of those key things. And, you know, there's going to be a lot of others following us onto this, but this is where the main tool that people are using now to navigate around the UK to find charge points now actually allows you to pay within that app. Thank you. I did hear you. So that allows you to actually pay within that app. So it's no longer a case of having to have multiple apps to do multiple different things. It's started to become that seamless, frictionless experience. And then there's that other model, which is the customer who I get my electricity and I pay for my electricity already and I charge at home. So when I'm away from home, why do I have to go down a different route? I see Graham's already got one of those out. So then you've got the electric juice network, which does exactly that. I use my Octopus Energy card, I tap at a charge point and it goes straight onto my electricity bill. So, I mean, that's where I've come from. That's the way I see it. This is where we're going. There's so much more to do. And that's me, mic drop and out.
Oh, 10
Just
seconds.
about to mute you then.
No,
Brilliant. Thanks,
don't mute
James.
him.
Timing.
No worries.
Thanks for not giving Sam the opportunity to get his clock out. So,
I know.
so before we go to questions, John, do you have any questions from the mailroom that need answering?
Oh man, I got loads.
So special guests, if they're up to you, then do come online and answer them for us, please. Thank you. I see that's not all for James.
James, like you, I'm a stupid man who likes things simple. And I've got Ted Anderson here who said, do we think that 150 kilowatt chargers will be required to provide sub 15 to 20 minute 80% charging? In simple terms, do we need quicker chargers for the cars we've got right now?
I think it depends, doesn't it? I mean, do I need a 150 kilowatt charger outside my house when I'm going to be parked all night? Probably not. Do I need one at a massive charging hub like GridServe and Pivot Power are putting together, where I can pull in, charge, quick lubricate, get back in my car, and I'm up to 80%? Absolutely. So I think it's all about having the right power at the right place for the right circumstances.
Courses.
Yeah,
Horses
exactly.
for courses. Good man. Thank you, James. Where have we got now? Ian Hood. This might be for Paul, actually. I wonder, what's the best installation and repayment model for fleet vehicles to charge at employees' homes? Much experience of that, Paul?
Well, so I mean, we've had them on here in MENA. Of course, MENA have a tool, but equally the sort of payment solutions that James has just mentioned, you know, coming from Allstar, ZapPay, you know, I think, you know, if Allstar could replicate what they do in with a fuel card and do it for electricity, then that would be pretty awesome. But at the moment, MENA is a good way of connecting up at all aspects of it, because what they do is they bill back to businesses. They take the charge off, the cost off your energy bill. They pay that for you and then bill the respective parties. And they can do that to you through a subscription. They can also incorporate, you know, sort of tap and go around the country as well with a couple of energy suppliers. So there's a number of good solutions there. But Sam has a point too.
Yeah, just to answer the same point as Paul, really, that we're doing something similar with RFIDs on our chargers, not at grid server locations. So whether that be on a commercial premises or outside someone's house, we're going to use the same RFID card, and it will know which location it's at and bill accordingly. So if it's at someone's home, then it doesn't bill anything. It just captures the energy consumed, which can then be subsequently expensed. Whereas the same card used at the grid server location, well, that might be billed back to the employer, for example. So I think there's lots of ways of being able to do that and solve that challenge in one way.
How do we sort of get all these things working together, though, Sam? Because we've already talked about, you know, GridServe potentially doing it, Juice, ZapPay, MENA. There are so many different operators. Is it just a commercial free-for-all and we'll just see who wins?
Yeah, I think it is going to be a commercial free-for-all, and I think it is see who wins. I think it really, really is, because there is so much disparity in the market, which has been highlighted many times already today. Some people will survive that, and some people won't. You know, I completely subscribe to all of James's comments, but at the same time, you've highlighted 3 different sources by which you can charge. So, you know, even within your own simplicity, which I fully agree with, there's complexity within it. If you're not on Juice, or you're not on Zap, or you're not on the third one I've forgotten, Allstar, that's it.
Allstar.
But yeah, it's going to be tricky. Contactless is going to solve a lot of that simplicity, and then you're going to have your preferences, and I think that's just going to how it's going to have to be for a while.
I think it's how you integrate into people's lives, though. As you know, one person might want to use one channel, another might want to use contactless. And by making those things available, then if I can choose one way to do it, if I can choose to be an Octopus customer or ZapPay customer or contactless, if I can make that choice myself and then do that the way I want to do it, that's the key thing. It's making sure that we're putting the customer at the front of that and saying, if a customer wants to do it this way, we fit in with what they want, not we tell them they have to do it our way.
Yeah, I mean,
philosophy.
I mean, I guess if I could run, I don't know whether this analogy works or not, but in a cafe environment with a Costa or a Starbucks, etc., you can have cards and have access to different cafes, right? But ultimately, you can use your debit card as well. So you end up having your own preferences as to whether you want a cost membership or not. But you can still turn up anywhere and buy coffee anywhere you like. And I suppose in the EV world, it needs to be the same as that.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Sarah, you had a question. You're on mute.
Yeah.
Not that we've done 16 episodes of this.
Am I, or have I lost my voice? Oh, you never know, do you? You never know. James, I absolutely love your human first thinking. Thank you. As we know, behavior change requires a trigger, a drip feed, remember some messages, 2 to 4 week experience window, and then like 18 months of change curve. How can we really focus on this interoperability thing? I mean, I get the point about coffees, Sam, but this is so much more expensive than a coffee. It's such a massive life-changing decision. How do we like increase the visibility and positive press around charging?
It's not that much more expensive than a cup of coffee.
No, it's pretty similar.
I'll just go and buy myself another electric vehicle. I meant the whole package. Obviously, we know the whole life cost works out the same. Yeah. But I deal with people, guys. I deal with people, and these are the things that people say. What do you reckon?
So I think you're right. I mean, if somebody's looking to buy a new car, then it's getting to the point where it's no more an expensive a decision than buying a dinosaur burner. So so we can take that bit out of the equation. Then it's about the simplicity and I think one of the biggest challenges is you know, people still have in their mindset that when I go to fill my car up, it's a couple of minutes and a fuel forecourt. But we've all learned how to plug our mobile phones in overnight. We've all learned, for those of us that forget to do that like me, we've all learned that there's cafes with wireless charging. You can stick your phone on to charge there, which fits in with the people who don't have off-street parking and can't charge at home.
So it's
I think
mass market,
it's
then.
just about
mass market visibility.
We just need to educate people. We need to take away the fake news.
Very good.
But I also, just to dive in, I think there's also a business model innovation step here. I mean, I think Leo on the chat has flagged the mobile phone industry went through this big leap, which originally you had to buy a phone, it was generic, then you paid to make it ring, and then you had to pay per minute to use. The minute they bundled everything in together, cost of it, applications, the whole lot, it became very, very simple. So I think one of the things here is, I think the paying as you use a device as an interaction today is likely to disappear reasonably quickly. I think they'll end up seeing charging companies do a deal with your lease company, so it's wrapped into one, or the manufacturer of the car. You'll still have individual charge points, but a lot of the interface piece will be a back office piece. And I think, you know, the EV curve, this growth learning curve, can look to other areas where you see huge step change in that business model innovation, technology innovation to kind of prompt this.
JC,
we're seeing that already, aren't we?
Starting to, yeah.
John, have you got an answer for that?
No, I haven't. I've got a question. And whilst we've got James on, Stuart Duckett has said, I've used an Engenie, easy and reliable. Most of the rapid chargers being put in are often singles or doubles. Can these be extended to a row of 4 or 6 in the future? I'm finding one charger these days is not enough. And I guess, Sam, you're nodding your head. You know, it's quantity and quality that's the key for you.
Yeah, he's absolutely right, because the reality is that we are going to have thousands and thousands and thousands of EVs, and having locations with 1 or 2 chargers is not going to cut it. No way.
Agreed.
Yeah. Go on, James.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, when we do install a single charger, and we're starting to install more and more 2 and multiple charger sites, we usually reserve the grid for multiple chargers with the ability to expand that site as the demand gets there. One of the reasons for not doing that early on is because the demand just wasn't there. But as we're starting to see it, you'll notice that more and more of our sites that we deploy have 2 or more chargers. It's worth also noting that the charge points we use have an AC connector as well. So whilst you won't get the full rate, we can charge 2 vehicles off a single one. So if we have 2 charge points in 2 bays, there's actually 4 chargers that can be connected at any given time.
Yeah. And one other thing, just I talked about road safety, and one thing that's really, really key for me is that charging points are not stuck in dark corners of car parks. And this is Stuart's point again. Can we put waste bins in so that we can collect all the rubbish that EV drivers might leave behind? So it's the simple things, as you said, James, right at the top of this, which if we do the simple things well, people-centric, customer-centric, we're on to a winner.
Absolutely agree. I don't want my mum charging a car in a dark corner of a pub car park.
No. If Julian's mum had to go out and charge her car in a dark corner of a car park, there would be serious kickoffs.
I would take it.
That's the sole reason why Sam's doing what he's doing at GridServe.
Exactly.
For Julian's mum only.
Yeah.
She lives in Braintree, I've heard.
A few more punters than just Julian's mum, I hope. But the places will be lit up like Christmas trees, so that everyone will feel very, very comfortable, which is important.
Good man.
Good man. So it's nearly time, I think, to invite Edward Sargent to give us 5 minutes of his time. So,
like the Scarlet Pimpernel, we seek him here. We seek him there.
Hey. Mobile office today, so apologies for that. And it seems that the harder the rain goes, the weaker the internet connection gets. So apologies, cut in and out of that. But lovely weather outside if anyone does get out and about. I must say on that one. Great, and I joined late. Apologies as well on that. But today, again, fantastic to see you all and really good stuff so far. So thank you for that. Do you want me to dive straight in?
Yeah.
Yes, please do, Edward. And Sam will be taking time. Keeping an eye on time.
Yeah, I've got my own little stopwatch here as well because I'm worried about getting hit with that clock.
I'm starting mine. Crack on.
Here we go. Can everyone see that all right?
Yep, all good.
So if you haven't heard of Pivot Power, very much a mission-driven company in what we're trying to do. Where we fit in is probably in the point where it gets even more confusing than EVs in general. We're coming in at a capacity level on what we're doing. What we're looking to do is create a combination of battery storage sites and private wire network. And what that really means is we've got 40 odd locations around England and Wales where we're actually tapping into Graeme's network rather than the local DNO network. So it's transmission level for us. We're putting in some storage. The first few projects, we've got a 50 megawatt hour battery on them going in. And with that, the idea is relatively simple. Let's integrate more renewables into the electricity mix in the UK. So you taking up excess wind, solar, etc., and then putting back out on the grid when it's needed. Using that connection, we create this private wire, which effectively is a private wire network that we build out from there and take to areas local to the connection. So ideally places where we can put in lots of chargers. It won't be Pivot putting in the chargers or the charge points. It will be providing the capacity to those that need it. So Engenie's, the grid serves of this world, for example, where they can then put in multiple chargers and not worry about running out of capacity. So looking at multiple megawatts at any location. Model is relatively simple on that. Low connection to start with a couple of megawatts, but know that we can expand going forward. We've got two types of sites that we're looking at. One near the substation or surrounding area, close to the strategic road network. The other on the outskirts of town. So large scale fleets, bus operators are also a very key area for us in the sense that those that will need multiple megawatts, plus knowing what the security on that supply is as they upgrade. So not having to pay for a huge connection that they're not going to use for a little while, but actually paying for a connection knowing that there's megawatts on top that they can upgrade as and when. Very simple diagram here of how it's set up in terms of what we do. This is the current normal connection. The only difference between this and Pivot Power is coming straight off the middle section there. So Pivot Power coming at a 33,000 volt network to provide space with capacity to those that need it, who are going to put the charge points in. Talking very fast to try and get a lot in very quickly, so apologies for that, but it's recorded, as you all know, so you can always watch it back later. Very simple example of the model. I get the mickey taken out of me a lot because I call this an electrical diagram. Engineers don't. But in essence, coming off a substation, providing capacity again through a wire to what we're calling super hubs, but charging hubs, EV hubs, areas of anywhere that you can put in multiple chargers, creating a network, not for lots of customers, really. It's more for those that are going to need the larger elements, the big megawatt stuff, to be able to put it in on that scale. What we're doing at the moment, so we've got our two sites that we've started and are being built at the moment in Oxford and Kent. Oxford's a really interesting one. We've teamed up with a number of partners and have got in some Innovate money. So actually, we've got two different types of battery technology going in there that's very exciting. On the battery stuff, from the private wire side, we're actually working with Oxford City Council and putting in a number of chargers, both DC and AC, into a park and ride that they've got there just off the A34 down there. So watch this space as that opens up early next year now, probably. Lots of fun things going on. And in our world, again, where interoperability is a big problem here and it's going to get ironed out, we're also having lots of fun with the regulators working through how all this works and how we keep innovating on the electricity network. So for those people that are just getting into this and understanding DNOs and how it works and your KVA and your connections, don't worry, it's stupidly complex and unnecessary amount of acronyms. But the upside is the information is getting better. There are people working on it. So hopefully you can learn more and it's getting easier to understand. And there is a big push on that. So fingers crossed we're seeing that improve. Looking forward, I'm actually stuck somewhere in between Coventry and Birmingham at the moment due to my inability to take directions from someone in my phone that's telling me where to go. But looking at the sites at the moment, so we are looking at the Midlands to open up in probably late next year, maybe even early 2022, depending on how things go. But really excited about setting that up. Again, the model is to have it so that there are multiple high power chargers for the transient users. So if you can get to the Midlands, you can get your whatever your car can take in terms of DC power, whether that's 150 or 350 kilowatts, and go from there. Very simple model of the Oxford site. There are the sites. I will call it time now. Thank you very much.
So close.
Thanks for that, Edward. So let's go to the panel, and John Curtis in the mailroom for some questions for you.
Oh my good grief! Right, there's thousands of things. There was something around grants for local authorities, and local authorities not giving sufficient grants to buy EV vans in Norfolk, Paul. So people are wanting to buy electric vehicles, but they're not able to because the grants aren't high enough. Are you coming across this anywhere else?
I'm being from Norfolk myself, I'd love some grants. If there are some, I'm very up for that. Have come across elements like that. I think it's interesting what out there. Haven't come across the inability on the grant funding for vehicles on that side. I do say we're working closely with Oxford Council and love what they've been doing in sense of taxis and try before you buy in that area. Love what Nottingham's done in that space. I think there's a lot to be said for some of the innovative models. Have seen some really interesting where maybe a local authority could effectively act similar to sort of the bank of mum and dad for taxi companies, and then underwrite elements where then it's a pence per mile job for the taxi owners, especially in some of the more areas where they're used to only spending, you know, 5-7 grand on a second-hand TX3 effectively, or a black cab in areas like that. So how do we get that meet in the middle costs and then enforce the clean air zone? So there has to be a meet in the middle. If there's a lack of funding, yeah, need to work on that.
Yeah, and it's about being innovative, isn't it, with the funding? Nottingham are a brilliant example of people who've just gone out of their way to make it work.
John, never thought I'd say this, but you've gone really quiet.
Me?
That's not a thing.
Me, darling? Really?
That's much better, yeah.
Is that better? Right.
John, can I ask Ed a really quick question?
Go, Sam.
What are you driving?
A horrible old thing. So, quick plug. My Renault Zoe, I had an email this morning from Julian at this company, Voltec. Don't know if anyone knows them, if anyone's got any contact.
No, never heard of them.
No.
Yeah.
I've heard his mum's very nice.
I'm expecting an email from her shortly.
Oh, I thought you said Julian's bum is very nice.
That might be too, but that wasn't what I said.
He did stand up doing the video calls. Yeah, he's done that. No, should be coming. Renault Zoe coming on 9th of November, Johnny. 9th of November, please. Just holding you to that one.
The day before my birthday.
Which is why I'm celebrating by having one of your cars. Fingers crossed.
Thanks, Ed. Now, Johnny, we've got a question for you, actually. Can you comment on Renault bundling 3 years of charge into the US launch of latest models?
I can't actually. It's not something in the UK market. Not something that we're offering in the UK market. Not imminently, that's for sure. But it's the first I've heard of it. Not involved with the US market, unfortunately. But I will do some research, and if you want to know, whoever asked that question.
It was Neil Durno. Yeah,
Neil, I'm more than happy to get back to you in regards to that. And if anybody else wants to know, then I can stick it on the EV Café group, I guess.
It does raise, and to Graham's point earlier, that the EV solution transition is something that is much easier to bundle together, and there are already solutions growing around combining the vehicle and the charge, and times it's definitely something that I think will make a difference in the coming weeks.
Yes. Sorry, I can add to that actually. So there is something that we've been working on for the last, I think, coming up to 3 years ago since it was first launched. It's called ZE Pass, and it's an access card to the public network. But obviously, with the lack of interoperability and everything else, it's been a bit of a challenge bringing that to the UK. So although it's available in place in Europe, and by the sounds of it, it's available in the US as well. So that was my point.
Good to know. Sam, one for you. This is Leon Davis. He says, "Hi Sam, great news on the project. I'm working with Costa and W.H. Smith. But what about really local ethical SMEs? Is there room or scope for this and to really bring down the carbon footprint? A really hyper-local community shop."
It reminds me of that services in Gloucester. It's very local.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And Westmoreland services in the Lake District.
T-Bay,
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
T-Bay, is it? Yeah.
How do I answer that? Yeah, so there's some really good question, and I think that we do need to look at the local market, and we will do. We've got certain pop-ups that are going to be in or around the forecourt during launch and otherwise, so that we're able to try and tap into some of the local market as well as some of the big street brands that we do need in order to assist us in this very large infrastructure we're creating. So it's still a good question, and it's something that we need to be very wary of. As far as the carbon emissions perspective is concerned, we're doing a tremendous amount, not just by producing the electric forecourts, but also by acquiring solar farms, which we then sleeve the energy from and to create a net zero solution for the CO2 emissions. So yeah, there is an inordinate amount of renewable energy and green energy that goes into these forecourts, but at the same time, we do need to look at how we can localize some of the retail elements and reduce some of the supply chain traffic movements as well, I think. So that's a good point that we need to be very conscious of in the fullness of time.
There's a question from Paul Barnfather, and Paul has been a long-time friend of this event, so he gets 2 questions today. Mandatory contract roaming at all charge points, yes or no? And I think there's a wider question here, which is, should the market dictate how the EV world develops, or should it be legislated for? What do you think, chaps and chapesses?
Graham's going to love that one.
Well, no, it's really interesting. This is the way this stuff sort of works. So if you look at traditional progressive governments, they like their main mindset is markets will ultimately fix everything. So actually, there's an element of they call it light touch regulation. Set some direction of travel, see how the market responds, and if it needs to intervene with a little nudge in the right direction, then it will do. So we're actually in that evolutionary process now, which is why you actually see the nudge being, so the Project Rapid piece was they weren't seeing the uptake in choice and growth in charges at motorway service areas. One of those barriers was underlying infrastructure. So they're doing the nudge, provide the infrastructure. The reason they're not providing the money for the charge points is if you remove the risk of the grid infrastructure, you've created a natural area for a level playing field to compete. So actually, from a government perspective, they're doing a little bit of both. They're trying to allow commercial charge point manufacturers to innovate the hell out of this and not curtail that, but only intervene only where as an appropriate. I suspect that's why you've not actually seen legislation being taken forward yet following the EV Energy Task Force recommendations. They have the powers, but I think they're just teasing this along. So, and a lot of that is done with conversations with charge point manufacturers, the likes of the SMMT, big fleets. There's an element of trial and error here before you start wielding the stick, which is legislation. And that's as challenging from a national grid perspective, who a highly regulated monopoly, as it is for those looking at starting a charge point company.
Well, thank you, Graeme. You're always a font of knowledge as far as legislation goes. And you're right. I mean, I think legislation has always been the final straw, hasn't it? When everything else has failed and market forces don't work, for the Tories, this is the way to go. If we were to have a Labour administration, however, rules might change. The approach may be very much to legislate and support through state ownership.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you will have seen through the last election, one of the Labour Party manifestos was to nationalise the grid networks. I mean, the strange thing in that, though, is actually we've got 880,000 shareholders, right, of which the majority are pension funds. So actually, anybody on this call with a pension is effectively a shareholder of networks. So I'm not sure what it was going to achieve above and beyond having a big stick, but that's why we've also got a very strong regulator to make sure that you actually get the right outcomes and don't load costs on that consumers will pay.
There's one, thank you, Graeme. There's one final question from Michael Gibson. And Michael asks about, do we have any preference on how roaming and interoperability actually happens with charge points? And I have to say, contactless payment seems to me to be the easiest way to get interoperability. We've all got our cards that we wander around with, where we can pay for our product and go away. Is that the simplest way of achieving this, or are there better ways?
I think it's the only way. It's the only way, really, because and then you have your preference as to whether you have a particular deal or a particular arrangement with one particular provider that gives you a better rate than the contactless one when you turn up.
Yeah.
I just can't see how you can enforce anything other than that.
I think Sam's exactly right in terms of the ability to just rock up and pay at a market rate, whatever that market rate is, and the market will probably dictate very much what that finally ends up at being. But also kind of the same mindset around the fleet option, where you've got All-Star, where you get 5p a litre of dino juice back for every, so it'll be per kilowatt, you'll get a little bit off, 2 or 3p per kilowatt potentially off of what it is, and back in a rebate to a company. So I think that kind of scheme is, you've got the ease of being able to do it, and then the benefit of signing up to a particular tariff or app or whatever it might be.
Thanks, Paul. Before we go back to all of the panelists, I wonder, Jonny, if I might ask a question generally of our audience. We've got 107 people at the moment on this call. Wow. And we heard from the Prime Minister yesterday that we are potentially going to be working from home as a preference for the next 6 months. As far as the EV Café is concerned, do you think that we should continue to do fortnightly or monthly shows? Should they be an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours? Because we want to continue to meet your needs. And I'm sorry for stealing your thunder, Jonny, but I guess these questions are all kicking around in your head as well.
Yeah.
What is it that we can most beneficially do for you as our audience? We've got potentially 6 months of programs that we can put together and webinars. Do you want an hour? Is an hour too short? Hour and a half? 2 hours? Is that too long? What subjects do you want us to cover? Which of the panelists should we get shot of?
Don't ask that question, John. We'll all be gone. John, it's interesting you say that, because the numbers are relatively low in comparison to 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks. We've been over 200 at this top stage of the day. And I think that is down to a little bit of webinar fatigue. I appreciate that Green Fleet, AutomotiveEV, and Association of Fleet Professionals are also on today, or have been on today. So yeah, very good to raise that, John, to our audience, because we'd very much want to hear from you, whether we should propose a little bit of a break to give that, people that have got webinar fatigue, or we should be rolling them now because people are encouraged to work from home again. So yeah, thanks, John. And before we go to Paul, I'll give you just 1 second. Can I just ask that Sukky, David Hunt, Chris, James can all come back online for the last sort of 20 minutes or so, and just have a brief conversation and answer any questions that might come up. And feel free, any of the participants, audience, to raise your virtual hand and challenge us, ask us any questions for the last sort of 20 odd minutes. You've got us all in one room now.
Very quickly, John, is there going to be a greatest hits show reel? Are you going to do the...
There's got to be.
Yeah.
We've in excess of 100 special guests, believe it or not, now. So, we're definitely going to have to look at editing all that 32 hours or 34 hours of footage that we've got. And we'd love to invite every single special guest on again, but for a more physical event when COVID-19 disappears, I think that'd be great. So definitely. Paul, you did have your hand up.
At this juncture, whilst we've still got everybody and we've got this wonderful panel of people all talking about charging and infrastructure, I thought I would share that link that I mentioned earlier. I've just put it in the chat box now to sign up to, push for more charge points. So, I said I would share it. There it is. Please do sign up, and let's see more infrastructure come to life in the localities. And it might help grants, it might help local support around planning and all that kind of stuff. So good.
Okay.
I've got a question.
Sorry, I've just seen a message in the chat saying, can Sarah's airline co-pilot make a return, please? I absolutely agree with that.
I thought that was the worst one I'd ever done.
I know, that's why I went back. It was brilliant.
Well,
Graeme, sorry.
You never know.
Sorry, Graeme.
That's all right. It was just bearing in mind we have a huge pool of knowledge and opinion on both, the guests and in the audience. What do we think is going to be the outcome to the internal combustion engine, sale of no more petrol or diesel cars? Do we think 2030? Do we think 2032? Do we think 2035? Do we think it's going to be hybrids? What's people's thoughts, right? There's been a massive consultation. We were expecting Boris to say something Monday. That didn't happen because COVID's got worse. There's rumours that it might be on the 30th. That's probably going to get pushed into the long grass. I mean, I'm just gut feel. Has anybody got a view or a feeling here? Because at the end of the day, I'm trying to make sure I plan for infrastructure for whenever that is, and the scale up to that.
John, over to you first. You had your hand up.
Graeme, I've got a strong feeling that 2030 will be the political answer. I don't think there will be any alternative, and I think pressure groups will push so hard for us to be in line with other countries in Europe. What I also think, though, is that we need to clarify the messaging here, in that no more petrol or diesel vehicles doesn't mean the end of dino juice. What it does mean is that we will still have petrol cars, we will still have diesel cars. They are not the evil that they are made out to be. They are part of a mix. We don't yet have the technologies to totally replace all of the vehicles on our roads. And we see this every time we have a webinar, that there are special groups, there are heavy vehicles, there are specialist vehicles that just can't yet be replaced. We have no long-term strategy other than for electric vehicles, and there are many, many alternatives. So I think it's too hard to say, but there will be a mix of transport until I'm in the ground.
I think you're right, John. And also, we say it every single time, but if we simply replaced every dino juice car with an electric car, then we'll be stuffed anyway. There'll be no room in our cities. So we've got to think of something more innovative. And I think that's where the house builders, developers piece comes in.
Absolutely.
I wanted to mention that we do need to think about, if we're going to bring it forward to 2030, which I would love to see, but the manufacturers from a van perspective definitely, I don't think, will be ready to deal with every use case out there. There's that middle ground of 2032, which Scotland have already opted for. And, you know, maybe that extra couple of years would give the potential to do that. But 2035 is still bringing it forward 5 years. And from a van perspective in particular, I think they might need that extra bit of time. But I'm all for putting 2030 as long as the manufacturers can put their hand up and say, yeah, we'll cope with that.
Can I tell you where I think it'll land? Can I tell you where I think it'll land politically? I think those who want to push it forward, they'll announce for petrol and diesel only propulsion will be 2030. And then what I think they'll do is they've obviously been listening to the SMMT. There'll be an easing, and it'll be hybrids banned after 2035. So I think what you'll end up doing is actually trying to please the most of the camps of those opinions. But it'll be interesting to see how it ultimately plays out.
Yeah, sorry, I've seen a few hands raised. I will just do them in order. So I saw Chris, you had your hand up first, then David, then Sukky. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess I'm quite excited to see what the end result is, but I sort of think it's a little bit irrelevant. If you don't provide the infrastructure and educate the population, it doesn't matter what target the government puts out.
Yeah.
And the other part is, because it's relating to new car sales, if they don't get the education piece and the infrastructure piece right, all you'll see is the second-hand market for diesels and combustion engine vehicles prolonging the agony that we're in the transition. So the target is, unless they include all car sales as opposed to just new car sales, that's my worry, is that is going to be what happens.
Okay.
That's a
David.
ending. I'm sorry to give that perspective, but
I think the education piece has been touched on, and clearly that's really important. I agree with Graeme that I think 2030 will be the for sort of full scale electric diesel, and probably 2035 for hybrids. Love to see it earlier. I think if we all do our jobs right, we could get that earlier. And I think let's not forget, we still do a lot of iterative thinking, and sort of, again, one of the obvious examples is that we just replace every ICE car with an EV, and that's clearly not the goal or the objective. I think that's important, but I think necessity is the mother of invention, and in 10 to 12 years I don't see any reason why van manufacturers and others can't produce or provide vehicles which are not run on dino juice. I think if there's no alternative, then that's what happens, and we've seen that before in disruption. If you give people the right combination of sticks and carrots, things get done. The private sector is brilliant at doing that. So I think it's too easy for us to say OEM sort of product cycles are typically 5-7 years, whatever they might happen to be. Well, that's fair enough, but that's what it's been. But that's not what we can afford to let it be right now. We all know that there's a bigger agenda around climate and pollution and everything else. So I think politically 2030, 2035 will come out, but also if we will do our job right, we can get that down. We can get that under 20. We can make sure that before 2030, why would you buy a petrol or diesel car? Even if you were a hardcore Trumpite, why would you do it? It'd be a worse car and it would cost you more. So why would you do that? That's my thoughts.
Education and bums on seats. And as you mentioned about life cycles, I can tell you from Renault's perspective that any ICE vehicle that's in their life cycle at the moment, it's an immediate priority to electrify. And any other new models that come to the market from Renault will be BEV, not just a BEV to start off with, or plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. Sorry, Sukky, you were actually next, not me.
That's all right. Yeah, I take on your points, David, and yes, they're valid, but you know, it is a reality of how manufacturing works and also how our industry works as well, and all of those. Sure. So let's take some time to change that, and also let's think about our supply chain and what is the transition. I do agree, Chris. The date sometimes becomes irrelevant because it's how are we enabling the transition to get to net zero by 2050. And you've seen manufacturers make their announcements. We've got 83 vehicles available in the UK, more so across the rest of the world, probably another 150 coming out next year. It's happening. And this isn't a decision that was taken, you know, just in the last quarter. From design to manufacturing and being available to purchase, a vehicle takes between 4 and 7 years. So these decisions have been made a very, very long time ago. So they're absolutely getting there. The key thing is consumer confidence. You know, we sometimes find ourselves in this, I hate to use the term bubble, considering the current situation, but we're all EV evangelists, we love it, it works for us. We're at 1% of the park, you know, so 2030 at 40% of the park is still very ambitious. So how do we change those 35 plus million vehicles to electrification and the drivers that go with them? So let's not forget the consumer in all of this. The technology makes it possible, but let's aid the consumer to get there.
We all know that the OEMs are holding back for a number of reasons, some more than others, of course, on this transition. And we just need to make sure that that's not allowed to get away with that.
Well, I think those kind of, you know, almost conspiracy theories, if you like, don't help, because it's almost putting a negative slant on the argument. Because if you tell the public OEMs don't want to do this, why would they want to go out and buy? They're going to question everything. So let's be positive about it. There are vehicles available. Go out and buy one.
Not readily, not as easy as they could or should be. Listen, I know it's for the automotive manufacturers, it's a massively difficult job. Nobody underestimates that. And it's going to be really challenging. It'd be sad to see any go to their demise, and that's obviously a possibility. But we also just need to make sure we're keeping on the pressure, both legislatively and as a consumer perspective, to keep on pushing and pushing and pushing, because we just don't have time. We just don't have time to wait for a time frame which was comfortable for the OEMs or comfortable for the oil companies. We have to make sure we're pushing them to make them uncomfortable, because we know what can be achieved when they're uncomfortable.
Okay, thanks, Dave. We're running out of time, so over to you, Paul.
A couple of quick points. I mean, the manufacturers have been dealing with this for a lot of years. So I first drove a Sprinter, Mercedes-Benz, but I'm going to speak from a van perspective, because that's where I think we're dragging our feet more than ever. In 2004, which is 2 full life cycles ago. You know, van life cycles are much longer than cars, so we're already way behind. Ford don't even have a product on the market. It is time to put some pressure on these guys, because that is what is affecting consumer confidence, because vehicles are not being brought to market effectively and they're not being communicated in a way. We've got to deal with education. We've got to promote that. But if we promote it and there is no support from the OEMs, and the key ones being people like Ford, VW and Mercedes, and they are coming to market with stuff, but maybe not in the way that we would hope, given that they've been at this a very long time. They have been doing it for some years and they're not pushing it over the line. We need to encourage them to do so that we can see effective solutions and consumer confidence come, because the manufacturers are backing it.
Okay, I'd like to just shine some positivity there, just to say that from Renault's perspective, you know, we did electrify, you know, convert the ICE version of Kangoo a little while ago. We've done that with Master, and we're coming to the end of the life cycle of some of these vehicles, and some not that I know much information about them, but you know, in the coming years, so no more than sort of 2-3 years, we're going to see some really fantastic vehicles coming on the van market. Not that I'm able to share at the moment, but it's very positive. So at the moment there are horses for courses, but there'll be more horses for different courses in only a matter of a couple of years. So I've got a few hands on the screen. It's quite a funny, but I think John was first, then Sam, then Edward, then we'll do our goodbyes. Is that all right? Over to you, John.
Works for me, thank you. This is why I love the EV Cafe. We've got Sukky who's there saying, let's all be positive. We've got David saying, let's have some realism. And that's a wonderful, wonderful thing, because we're all EV evangelists. We all love them, but we recognise there are challenges. We don't skirt around them. We call them out. We deal with them as best we can. And we try to find consensus, which helps us move forward. I bloody love you people, because I think this is the only event, online or anywhere else, that says it as it is. We call it out. We support the industry because we know it's important. We know that manufacturers are working very, very hard to move in the right direction. There is still more to do. Let's keep doing it.
Brilliant. I think, Sam, you were next.
Yeah, it was a quick question to Graeme, really, and it's flipping his own question, which prompted all of this back at him. And I think I know the answer to it before I've even asked it. But if we've got the need for power, we've got the need for infrastructure, and we've got the need for vehicles, right? If we boil it right down to the simplicity, we know the OEMs can produce the vehicles if they were forced and pressured to do so. We know we've got people that can build charging infrastructure, because I'm one of them, and there's other people in the call that can do that. And I'm pretty sure that you can supply the power, Graeme. So if it is in the case that electric vehicles are going to be the only choice in town in 2030, can National Grid cope with it? I think I know the answer, but if you can, then there's no reason why that target can't be met, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the two elements of that are wires and energy. On the energy basis, just in the next 10 years, we're going to build 30 gigawatts of offshore wind, not National Grid, but as a country. That on its own pretty much covers the volume of energy to electrify all of transport. The other one is wires. The wires were set up to be connecting big power stations with big conurbations, but actually we travel all over. So yes, there's some reconfiguration. The grid needs to evolve, but all of this is infinitely possible. We've gone from a situation where there was no renewables on the system some 15 years ago, and in recent weeks, we've seen 30, 40, 50, even 60% renewables running the country. So it is all a transition. It is all ultimately possible. The challenge you've got is you've got multiple mixed business models. You know, the National Grid and the infrastructure model is a long-term asset play. The kit that we deploy today is here for 40 years. It will still be running when we're in a net zero world. And therefore, that's a long-term low asset play. Whereas you've got charge point providers who are actually short-term, volume, selling boxes of electronics. So the challenge we've got here is, instead of just saying it just has to be done, there are different competing models. There are different business models that allow us to actually fund and commercially survive the transition. And that's really the innovative thing that's happening now, is that you're seeing energy, transport, and digital. There's three big industrial sort of sectors working out how this comes together. But ultimately, yes, Sam, the grid will cope. Yes, there'll be wrinkles in this in little bits and places, but when you look at the big numbers, this is just another transition. And that's before we even get into the topic of heat. I spend 8 times more on heating my home than I do filling up 2 electric cars. So actually, from a grid perspective, transport is easy. You may think this is difficult, but across running a nation, right, transitioning heat to clean is far more complicated, difficult than transitioning transport, which is why we need to move faster on transport, because then that buys us more time to fix the more complicated and difficult to fix stuff.
Brilliant, thank you. And then lastly, Edward.
I'm going to wrap up actually by combining hopefully a little bit of everything by what Graeme just said. We've been working with National Grid now for the last nearly 3 years, I suppose. They've transformed as an organisation and opening up. When we approached them the end of 17, early 18, I think there's sort of over 200 connections available. We looked at and took 40 or so of them. I think the rest of them have all been taken now. So there's huge amounts of innovation happening on that side, which is really exciting to see. Going back to John's point about having everyone on board, what really excites me about all of this is if you go back 10 years, if we ban things in 2030, if you go back to see where we were 10 years ago and how much ground we covered and then look forward, everything's on the table to change. So there's a huge amount coming through from various different manufacturers with new ones and people bringing resuscitating old badges and things like that coming out, plus the stuff that's evolving and being learned from now. Start adding in the mass creation of the cells, effectively the energy storage elements inside, which is just getting started for a lot of companies. You know, GM just announcing their 2022 date. The 2030 date isn't scary. I think it is just getting people educated and getting people excited about it. So yeah, I'd say it's a really positive thing, and we've got a huge amount of ground to cover. And going back a year, going forward a year, it's going to be a huge change.
Okay, thank you, Edward. So just want to wrap up then and just say, well, it's been another fantastic show, and thank you to all the amazing special guests we've had on today and to all the attendees. Just some quick reminders. If in your free time, please do join the EV Cafe group on LinkedIn so we can keep these discussions going in between sessions, and also to connect with the special guests from today and previous shows. We can also answer any questions that we might have missed today, or if you've got any questions from this session, then feel free to ask them there. At the moment, our next session is booked for the 21st of October, but we'll welcome everybody else's thoughts on that, whether we do one a little bit earlier based on the latest government guidelines. If you want to catch up, or if you missed anything from today, then feel free to visit our YouTube channel under EV Cafe. Lots of information and future developments on EV Cafe that we're planning will be coming soon. But last words from me really is just a big thank you for joining today, and we'll go to the panel. Any, I don't know, 20 seconds last words from everybody. I'll start, no, not doing hands, I'm going to start at the top left of my screen, sorry Sarah, and that happens to be Sam. So, and then I'll work my way down. You're second to last, unfortunately there, Sarah.
Just to say thank you to everybody who's listening. Thanks everyone who's listening. Please do reshare our LinkedIn posts, get as many people involved as possible. And there's quite a lot of work that goes on in the background to keep this going, and we're all very passionate about doing that. We do it in our spare time, but please do keep sharing it so that we can keep spreading the word.
Paul, you're next.
Well, I agree with Sam. Let's get it out as wide an audience as possible. Education is key, as we've touched on so many times, and the louder we can get the voice of everybody that doesn't know today about electric vehicles out to government, to DNOs, to vehicle providers, everybody, then the better it will be and the speedier the transition.
Great stuff. Over to you, Chris.
Oh, I didn't know I was going to get the privilege of this is exciting. No, I just thank you again for inviting me. This is a perfect example of the ecosystem within EV. Lots of people doing different things, all hugely valuable. There's not one that's needed over the others. It's going to be a combined effort that's going to get us to whatever that target is that Graeme referred to.
Thanks, Chris, for your input. Very valuable for today. And Sukky, over to you.
Thank you. Again, thanks for inviting me. I think key point really is let's just continue this conversation. There are so many options, but the answer has got to be the same one, which is we achieve net zero as quickly as we possibly can. But education, the mass consumer, is absolutely the most essential thing for me.
Thank you ever so much for today, Sukky. Really appreciated.
Thanks.
Edward?
There's no such thing as a stupid question, especially when it comes to the world of electricity and EVs in that sense. So if in doubt, ask. Someone will know, and you'll probably find that the person saying the acronym doesn't actually know what it means either. Always ask. You'll learn so much so quickly, and speak to others about it. It's quite a fun ride.
Thanks for that, Edward. James, you're next on my screen.
Yeah, thanks. No, I just think it's been great talking to all you guys, and I think the clearest thing that I can take from this, and anyone can take from this, is we're all trying to do the same thing. And I think just on my screen now, there's a lot of people there, all of whom together can achieve what we're trying to achieve. So just keep doing it.
Perfect. Over to you, John.
We are family. I got all my sisters and me.
Yes.
I just think this is the best community there is, and it is utterly wonderful to share virtual hugs with you guys. We need to educate, run in the same direction, because we know that net zero is the best thing we can do. Thank you. Love you.
Yeah, Graeme Sad has just put on the comments, say very interesting. I always learn something at the EV Cafe. Goodbye. So goodbye, Graeme, and thanks for that. David and Sarah, you're last. So David, do you want to go first?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the invite. It's great. as we said before, I think one of the great things is this kind of collaboration, and even where people don't agree, because we have the same objective in mind, it's great that we can shake a few feathers, or shake a few sort of trees and ruffle the few feathers and get people talking and pushing the agenda along. I think the important thing that sort of, I think Paul touched on before, and Graeme and I discussed sometimes, I got into clean tech in 2007. The world is monstrously different since that period of time in terms of clean energy and renewable energy and e-mobility. Without wanting to be sponsored by Adidas, but the impossible is nothing. That brings to mind. You know, we've really just got to push and push and push through all the avenues we have, through education, through these conversations, through amplifying and getting people testing vans and testing vehicles and pushing and pushing. We've got to get to a point where we do some serious damage to the fossil fuel industry, and with a world of participants like we've had today, it's really encouraging that we can do that.
Thanks for that, David. And before we go to Sarah to give us our last words, I got a message from Mark Griffin from the ITT Hub. He's saying that he's about to take delivery of 2 EVs. I have not experienced EVs in the past. He's asking for 3 things that he should be doing, you know, when he first takes delivery of his cars. So what I say to you, Mark, is go onto LinkedIn group, ask those questions, and let's all help them out. Over to you, Sarah, to say the last words.
Just to agree with everyone and say we are in danger of preaching to the converted, and the unconverted keep focusing on what we haven't done yet. So let's stay positive, let's engage with everyone, share, share, share. And that's the way that we can be the catalyst in our fabulous community.
So right.
On that note, bye everyone.
Bye everybody.
Bye.
Cheers everyone. Bye.
Bye.